Hello, this is your Health Enhancement Show. I'm Hilda Tatom, and my guest this evening is the Reverend Dr. Charles Hall, who is also known to his friends as Crazy Al. He is is it director? Is that your title?
It's something like that.
Okay, the director of the School for Gentle Hands, where he has all sorts of wonderful information on acupuncture, just ways of learning how to heal yourself.
Yeah.
So we'll talk a little bit more about what all the school is going to offer, but the evening is going to be spent discussing Chernobyl, how to deal with radiation, what Chernobyl really how it relates to us. Because I think a lot of you may think that Chernobyl is over with, and the truth is it may not be, at least for some people. So, how did you get interested in Chernobyl? Isn't that old news?
Chernobyl went off several years ago. It was an atomic power plant in the Ukraine, which is sort of southern part of European Russia. And it basically malfunctioned and blew up. There are a number of power plants in this country that build on the same model, and therefore at risk for the same kind of thing, which is a reason for talking about it here.
So you're saying that something like that could happen in this country?
Oh, it certainly could. We've got well over 100 of them in this country alone.
Okay. Well, that really just mainly affected the people right in the immediate vicinity, didn't it?
Well, no. It certainly had a lot of effect on the people in the city. My first real awareness came about a year or two ago, when some Russian doctors who were regional officials, sort of, they'd be the regional head for the southeast region of all the medical services in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
But they say southeastern region or western region or something like it. And 5 of these Russians came to this country and talked about these things. This was a tremendous investment in personnel resources for the Russian government to send them over here to talk to us. And they were down at some church out around the Emory.
What was their purpose in coming over? Just to share?
To talk about these power plants and the extreme danger that they really are.
Okay, to let people really know and become really conscious of the fact that this is not anything to be taken too lightly.
Yeah, and there was a very small audience in the church, I could say about 50 to 100 people. And afterwards, I asked one of the people some relevant questions about the relationship with what was the damage, the most common forms of illness that followed, and did they know any herbalism, because I use herbs a lot. And he said if he had thought that anybody would have asked that kind of question, he would have brought it with him, the answers with him, but he hadn't. And I haven't written because basically he gave me enough information. The basic damage that occurred after Chernobyl was genetic, which is already known, and tumors, which is another name for cancer, but the lump type cancer that makes the lumps and things that they cut out.
So so that essentially, from what I know, tumors are just where the toxicity kind of concentrates. So you really just get a really heavy dose of toxicity if you live.
Yeah. Well, when Chernobyl went off, there hasn't been any news in the American news media about this, for reasons which I would rather not discuss now, I think, because I don't really know why, but it's not been talked about.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of just blown away.
Yes. The first time I had a friend from Germany came through, and he only stayed with me for a day, and I deliberately asked him a whole lot of questions about it, and he gave me a whole lot of stuff, information. A few weeks later, another German traveler came through and visited a friend of mine, and gave my friend the same information. I got that one secondhand.
Well, the reason I'm having you on the show too, by the way, not to interject too much, is the fact that I had already heard the information you'd given me by way of somebody else who does some traveling, so at least parts of it. So continue. So what was the information that they gave you?
Well, when Chernobyl blew, there was a huge radioactive cloud, the mushroom cloud thing, and it traveled north out of Chernobyl and up across Finland.
Mm-hmm.
And then it went from, if this is Russia, Finland, it went up around the north edge of Sweden and Norway, up where the reindeer are, and came down somewhere over the North Sea and went over and sat on the Bavarian Alps for a while, for 2 weeks. And this huge cloud full of all this terrible stuff sat over the Bavarian Alps for 2 weeks, and then it rained.
So there was certainly a really heavy concentration.
There's certainly more.
But from what you said, there was a really good bit that was over northern Finland too.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of fallout over Russia, and at the time my friend came through, the people were losing their hair in Russia. And when the cloud went over Lapland, which is where the reindeers come from, the reindeer herds, which are huge up there, or were, died by the tens and hundreds of thousands.
Which is strange because you just don't hear. I thought a few of them had died, but I didn't realize they were just all decimated.
No, I read this in the newspaper, that they were dying by the 100,000.
So it was not just a really little...
No, it was not just a little dinky thing by any means. And I've heard since that the fish in the North Sea are radioactive now. This is the end of the Gulf Stream. The Gulf Stream goes in a circle.
Yes.
And so the Gulf Stream is carrying this stuff around in it. And we're probably getting some of it most anywhere. Well, the Goethe Institute downtown, incidentally, in the German language newspapers, were the third source of information. And I heard from persons who read the German accounts, and there was quite a fuss about it in Germany. When the cloud passed over Germany, of course it sprinkled little bits of stuff all over everything, and the German vegetable gardens, the people's homemakers' vegetable gardens became inedible. They couldn't eat them.
Then you were saying that it hit the Bavarian Alps very heavily too.
It hung over the Bavarian Alps, and then it rained, and the rain cleaned out the cloud and dumped it on the hay. The hay became radioactive because all that water funneled down the mountainside and settled in the valleys, washing all of this stuff down into the valley. And the German government declared that the hay was too radioactive to be fed to cows. So the Germans, being ever thrifty, proceeded to dilute it with good hay, which is and fed it to cows anyway.
We're not going to waste that.
No, we're not going to waste that good stuff.
But too, I think one of the horrors of radioactivity is that you can't see it.
Yeah.
So
and
I mean,
it was not visible.
Yeah, and it probably looked fine to them.
Yeah.
And people don't really
they knew what was happening.
Yeah.
Because they fed it to the cows, and the cow's milk came out radioactive because strontium-90 is one of the fallout minerals.
Well, it certainly didn't do the cows much good either, I wouldn't imagine.
I wouldn't imagine. I don't know. I would never think about the cow. Poor cow. Strontium-90 concentrates in milk tremendously and causes infant bone cancer. And this has been noticed downwind from White Sands, New Mexico, years and years and years and years ago. And all the government officials calmly deny it all the time. But the cancer rate among infants in the first 2 years went up something like tenfold just from White Sands, which was a
rather mild
little amount.
Yeah.
So the German people refused to drink the milk.
How in the world did they know which milk was which? It must have been rather scary.
At that time, it was probably just about anybody because the cloud had dispersed a little bit and probably covered mainly Northern Europe.
You know, so I guess people just weren't drinking milk, period.
They just probably stopped and wasn't there. But so the milk companies, in order not to lose their shirts, dehydrated the milk. This takes out 92% of the volume, and concentrates it 50 times.
So they really had a heavy dose of radiation.
Stuff like it glowed in the dark.
And then charitably enough, they shipped it on.
Nobody would use it. The German government declared it nuclear waste, less as if it had come out of the plant itself. So they put it in trains and they moved it around Germany. And my friend Klaus told me that there were 3 trains full of this dehydrated milk, and every time one of the trains would appear up in a city, and the city found out about it, they said, "Get that thing out of here."
Yeah.
So these 3 trains were shuffling around Germany, trying to find someplace to roost. And the German milk companies, in good let's not lose our shirts fashion, sold it to the third world countries, dirt cheap.
To Africa.
Africa, Central America. I don't know if any of it got in the United States or not. I really hope not.
You never know, though, because the dried milk is a part of lots of things.
Oh boy. So I stopped eating yogurt, unless it's made from cow's milk, whole milk.
Yeah.
And the cloud that did all this in the Bavarian Alps has gone around the world about 6-8 times now.
It hasn't dissipated yet?
No, it's got to fall down somewhere.
And it hasn't fallen down yet?
Well, I don't imagine all of it has.
So
the decay rate on some of that stuff is half of it goes away in 100,000 years, and half of it in 5,000 years is a pretty fast fallout. So this stuff is up there.
So it is
doing its number.
Yeah. So there's really just no way that we're not part of the problem.
That's right. There is no way that we have avoided that.
So, what I'd like for y'all to do now, if you're not totally depressed, we have some hope. There are some things that you can do for yourself. And I think that it's appropriate for everybody to learn how to take care of themselves. That's the reason we have the show. So, Dr. Hall and I'll be back in just a moment after we take a break, and we will talk about, we don't have all the answers, but we've got a few little suggestions for you. So stay with us. We'll be back in a minute.
That'll sit about their ear.
I hope so. I would hope so.
Without being quite as angry at capitalism as I managed to hold it down pretty good.
Yes, you did. You were just very jovial about the whole thing. Restrained.
Sometimes I get carried away with it.
So now we will discuss what you can do to handle radiation. We'll talk about irradiated foods and what you can do.
So we'll do that in the next 15 minutes. Huh?
Mm-hmm. We can move in a little bit into vegetarianism if we have more time than we need, and then continue the next show. Or what else do you think?
Do a little vegetarian, because that's on the food chain thing, and
Okay, let's.
3, 2, 1, you're on.
Welcome back. This is the Health Enhancement Show. I'm Hilda Tatom. I'm talking with Dr. Charles Hall, the Reverend Dr. Charles Hall, who is talking with me about what you do to handle radiation. We've been talking, for those of you who may just have turned in, about the effects of Chernobyl. And would you like to just, I think briefly, there was lots of radioactive fallout from Chernobyl that is still around. People are not handling and have not handled the situation very ethically or very well. And I think it's something that there are plants in Georgia, or is it?
There's one in Columbus under construction.
And South Carolina, I think, is actually the closest.
Probably the closest. There's no place in the United States except Eureka Springs, Arkansas, that is more than 100 miles from one of these things, which is nothing at all in distance. Most big cities are within 50 miles of one.
Well, if something like that were to go off, how much damage would there be?
Well, in my personal guesstimate, is that if one went off northwest of Denver, that it would wipe out northern United States. That's a bunch.
Yeah.
Actually, if it went off northwest of Chicago,
Because
or
of the
just west of
winds.
the way the winds run across the United States, they run from west to east. And this would take out the basic industrial America.
Is there anything we can do besides just being wiped away?
Well,
Or are
there
you
seem to be.
are you planning to leave the planet?
I may be leaving the planet prematurely.
Yeah.
If the winds were just right, Atlanta would either be in the direct fallout zone or just outside of it. It depends on whether it's winter or summer and how the winds are blowing. There are some things that apparently work, and since we've never been through one of these things before, except for Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we're not all that knowledgeable about what goes on and what we can do. The Russian doctors said that the two basic problems were genetic and tumors, which means basic deformed babies and lumps and bumps on the inside of the body, cancer.
Yeah.
About what to do with them, one of the things that happened at either Hiroshima or Nagasaki, I think it was Hiroshima, but I'm never going to keep it straight. The Macrobiotic Institute in this town was directly underneath the bomb. And the doctors and nurses at Nagasaki, or at the Macrobiotic Institute, drank 12 cups of miso tea a day, and apparently had little or no effect at all.
They had this before it happened or afterwards?
Immediately afterward, because immediately afterwards they were very busy.
Yeah.
I mean, they had this
So they were just kind of
bomb
living
that
on the
they
miso tea.
Yeah, they drank a lot of miso tea.
Now
This
you
is
know
about
what
half
miso,
teaspoons.
yeah, you know what miso tea is, and I know what miso tea is, but there are
Yeah.
lots of people who are watching who may not know what in the world is miso tea, and where would you get miso tea?
Yeah. Well, miso is a traditional Japanese thing that is made out of soybeans and several other grains, but the most popular grain of it is soybean. And they cook the soybeans or the other grain down until it's all mushy, and then they run it through one of these food mills and make a real mush out of it. And then they take rice, which has been given an infection of a fungus called a rice fungus. The name is on the tip of my tongue, and I can't get one of those long Latin names. Something about rice. It's a common fungus. And you stir this into the mush and add a little water, and then you put it in a crock and pack it down real tight, and you let it sit out in a little building, an outbuilding, you know, like your barn or your garage. And you let it ferment there for a year and a half. I made some of this stuff. I'm one of the few people in the city that's ever made it. I'm waiting for my year and a half to get up to find out what happened, because I really don't know.
And for those who really think, well, I would never know how to do that, you can buy it at health food stores or Oriental or grocery stores too. It's called miso, M-I-S-O.
And it's in almost all health food stores, and it tastes rather different. It's an acquired taste, but you take a spoonful of it, and then you put a little water with it, and it's a thick goo.
It's really, to me, I remember I was down in Florida at a health food restaurant, and they had this kind of French onion soup that was vegetarian. Bouillon is really, miso is kind of a vegetarian bouillon. It gives a very rich, it's a very delicious taste. It is really like bouillon. It just gives lots of flavor and heartiness to soups. They're lighter misos that people, I think, traditionally people have them in the summertime, and then they're darker ones. And it's soy paste.
Mhm.
and it tastes a little bit like soy sauce, except it's thicker and better. I think there's some vegetarian restaurants where they use the miso to make salad dressings,
Oh yeah,
which are good.
yeah. I don't eat much miso in the summer, but in the winter I like it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a real good winter food. It's very high in protein. It's supposed to be one of the really high foods in protein, more than meat.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
That's why you don't really, if you were fixing it, you wouldn't, I know that when you were fixing a soup or something, you put the miso in after it's cooked in a kind of a paste, because you don't boil it down, because it's supposed to really destroy the protein.
Yeah. Miso and tamari are very much the same. Tamari is sort of the juice of miso, or
And tamari is just a very nice soy sauce.
yeah, it's a Japanese name for soy sauce. You must always cook these things to kill the yeast,
Mm-hmm.
or some few of the enzymes. Now you only cook them for a minute or two, so
Because
to
if
put
you-
it in last.
Yeah, so if you don't cook it, what if you just had it with, why would you cook and kill the yeast?
It causes some vague kind of stomach ailment, which is very subtle.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anyone but an Oriental physician would recognize it. I don't know if I would recognize it. It takes, it's one of those subtle
Well, then
things
maybe
that
it's
just
not
are uncomfortable.
yeah, maybe it's not a good idea to use it in a salad dressing then.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so. People do.
Yeah.
I never use it raw since I found this out.
I never knew that, so I'm glad to know it.
Yeah.
But I think that really they say for people with candidiasis or systemic yeast problems, it certainly would exacerbate that if you don't,
certainly aggravate that in a hurry.
unless you do cook it for a minute or two.
Miso and tamari are one of the ways of counteracting the effect of radioactive fallout. Now there's some claims that pollen also. Now pollen is the male germ cell of plants,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very heavy in deoxyribonucleic acid. If you can't spell that, I can't either. But it's the basic genetic
You can say it,
molecule.
I'm impressed.
So pollen is one of these things that is claimed to counteract the genetic problem.
Where would a person
with
get pollen? Just out from their
health
car,
food
or?
stores. There's two kinds of pollen on the market. The most common one is gathered by bees, rolled in little balls, and as the bee goes back to the hive, the beekeeper makes it go through a hole, and scrapes the pollen off its leg, and it falls in a little drawer, and the beekeeper takes it out, dries it, and takes it to the health food store and sells it. It runs about $9 a pound, which sounds fairly expensive, except that
You just eat it.
you don't eat very much of it.
Yeah.
And because it has this deoxyribonucleic acid, it has all the basic amino acids in it
Mm-hmm.
that are common to plants and animals. And that's the vast bulk. So that if there is genetic damage in the germ cells in the human body, and you all know where those are, the deoxyribonucleic acid in pollen will replace it and straighten it out. So it keeps the sexual apparatus good.
Okay, which is
And
very
healthy.
nice.
If you're going to have babies after fallout, it certainly
Yeah.
is.
How about seaweed? Will it help, or sea vegetables?
Any good diet is going to help.
Mhm.
Seaweed has been used too. I don't really know. Do you know any more of these things than I?
I'm not sure about. I think I've heard some positive things about seaweed. I'm not sure if it's specific for radiation or whether it's just something else that really helps strengthen your body a lot. Which is, I think, Dr. Hall and I will be going into doing another show on vegetarianism, which you'll be wanting to hear. But I think that one of the points that we're wanting people to know is that one of the reasons for doing a vegetarian diet is that the vegetables are much less apt to have concentrated amounts of radiation.
Yeah. The animal eats vegetables. We eat vegetables. The animal concentrates them. We concentrate them. And if we eat the animal, we concentrate it even further.
Mm-hmm.
And this is an old argument for vegetarianism, is radioactivity. Along with all of the stuff that they put on, all of the chemical fallout that we're all subject to always anyway.
Pesticides are more concentrated in animals than they would be in your lima
They certainly
beans.
are. So vegetarian is it.
So-
Vegetarian diet is almost a necessity. Certainly decreasing the use of milk enormously. We are one of the few countries in the world that drinks milk after infancy. And there's real
But now we've been told that milk is a basic food. And how, I mean, there are all these people who are getting osteoporosis, and you're saying that they shouldn't have milk.
Oh, I didn't say they shouldn't have milk. There are other ways of getting calcium besides drinking milk.
Well, okay, so you're saying that cabbage,
Mm.
potatoes, almonds, tahini.
Tahini especially, yeah.
Mhm.
Bananas.
Mhm.
No, those have, that has
Or
phosphate.
the green leafy vegetables like
Mhm.
collard greens and turnip greens, which we'll be discussing at greater length when we were talking about vegetarianism. But really, one of the things I love is I had 2 children, and they both, I checked them out for calcium levels. One of them was allergic to milk, and the other one drank it just, I mean, I would almost have to restrain her. She was into milk so heavily. And her calcium was out of balance. And the one who ate collard greens and turnip greens and almonds, calcium levels were not too high and not too low.
Hmm.
Which
See?
is kind of interesting. Yeah, see, and it's the truth.
Yeah.
I mean, the cows get their calcium from the green grass.
Yeah. Liming the fields is an old standard, just to keep the grass nice and green,
Mhm.
and the cows eat it, and that's a good thing for cows and people. Yogurt makes the calcium more accessible. The yogurt bacillus does something to milk that makes the calcium easier to
So if
digest.
you are doing milk, then yogurt would be the way to have it.
Yeah, yogurt's the best way to have it. Really good yogurts are still hard to get. They put all sorts of funny things in yogurts these days.
If it's got sugar in it, if it's a dessert, then it really, I think lots of people are going to these little dessert shops, and it really isn't the best way to go get your calcium, because some of those don't really have much yogurt in them at all. They got lots of other funny things.
Yeah, things that make them look stiff and white.
Yeah.
They look like yogurt, as usual.
So, well, we're just about come to the end of the show, and I'm really pleased that you've been able to be with me, and I know that I hope that y'all will use the information. I hope you'll try making some miso soup. It's quite delicious. Just chop up some vegetables, and you'll add your miso to it, M-I-S-O. Before we leave, though, could you tell me a little, you're going to be having some classes at the School for Gentle Hands. When does it start?
Well, our first classes start the week after Labor Day. In fact, the day after Labor Day, we're having a meeting of the Congregation of the Healing Spirit, of which all healers in the city are welcome. And the first class is in traditional Chinese method of laying on hands called acupressure. This is like acupuncture, only use fingers. And this happens the first week. And if you would like to have a class schedule and find out when some of these classes are, there's a telephone number right there.
Which is 243-8787.
Yes, thank you.
So,
And we're starting the beginning series of acupressure every semester, and I think it happens Thursday night. And this is the class schedule you get. If you just simply call up the number, you get the answering machine, I'm sorry. But just give your name and address and put it on the answering machine, and I'll send you one of these class schedules, which has everything you want to know right in there.
yeah, about the School for Gentle Hands. And the Reverend Dr. Hall is making a contribution. He is quite committed to seeing people be in charge of their own health and doing what they can do for themselves, and he wants to teach you how to do that. So that's why he's been here, and I greatly appreciate your presence.
Oh, thank you.
So, and I appreciate yours too. You stay tuned, and Dr. Hall and I will be discussing vegetarianism, and even if you're not intending to be a vegetarian, you might want to be one on Wednesdays. So, see you soon.